Naomi Carter had rehearsed the words in the elevator mirror 47 floors below, and she said them anyway, standing in front of his desk with her spine straight and her hands steady. "I want a divorce, Taemin." The man behind the desk did not look up from the tablet in his hand. Calm Taemin read the last line of a shipping manifest, set the tablet down with the same unhurried precision he used for everything, and only then lifted his eyes to hers. They were the color of wet stone, flat and colder than the marble floor beneath her heels. "Say that again," he said. Not a question, an instruction. Naomi did not flinch, though something in her chest had already started to shake. She had married this man 8 months ago in a ceremony with 300 guests and armed security disguised as valets, and in that time she had learned exactly one thing about him with absolute certainty. He never asked a person to repeat themselves because he had missed what they said. He asked because he wanted to watch them say it twice. "I want out. I want the marriage dissolved. I've already spoken to a lawyer." His office took up the entire top floor of the Kong Dynamics Tower, glass on 3 sides, souls spread out beneath them in a gray haze of winter light. It was the largest technology company in the country on paper. Everyone who mattered in the city knew what ran underneath the paper. Naomi had known it too, eventually, though not soon enough. Taemin rose from his chair. He did it slowly, the way he did most things, as though speed were a currency he refused to spend carelessly. His suit was charcoal, cut so precisely it looked less like clothing and more like architecture. When he moved around the desk toward her, she caught the note of cedar and something colder underneath it, like the air right before snow. "You signed papers when you married me," he said. "Real ones. Not the kind a lawyer can undo, with a filing fee." "I don't care what I signed. I'm not asking your permission, Taemin. I'm telling you." For a moment, he only looked at her, and the look was worse than anger would have been. Anger she could have worked with. This was something closer to calculation, his eyes moving over her face the way they moved over a balance sheet that had come back with numbers he did not like. "Sit down, Naomi."
"No."
"Sit down." His voice did not rise. It never rose. That was the thing people outside his world never understood about men like him. The danger was never in the volume. She stayed on her feet. It was the only defiance available to her in the moment, and she used it. Behind him, through the glass, a hawk circled somewhere above the Han River, small as a comma against the white sky. "You don't get to walk out of this office and disappear into a life without me," he said. "You know that. You knew that the day you said yes at the altar." "I said yes because I loved you." The words came out rawer than she meant them to. "Past tense, Taemin. I don't anymore. Not after what I found in your safe." Something shifted behind his eyes, brief and gone. He had not expected her to say that part out loud. Not yet, not here. Naomi watched him recalibrate in real time, the way he recalibrated everything, turning a mistake into a variable he could control. "You went through my safe. I went through our bedroom. It happened to be in it." She lifted her chin. "3 names, Taemin. 3 men who used to run shipping routes for you. All 3 of them dead within a year of crossing you. You kept photographs. Why would you keep photographs?"
He did not answer that.
Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew something small, black, no larger than a car key fob. He turned it once between his fingers, unhurried, like a man deciding whether a decision was worth making. Then he pressed it. Naomi heard it before she understood it, a low mechanical groan running through the walls of the building, distant and enormous, like something ancient waking up. Down the hall, a heavy click, then another, farther away, and another after that, each one landing with the same cold finality, a chain of locks falling shut floor by floor beneath her feet. "What did you just do?" It was not a question either. She had learned that from him. "I secured the building." Taemin slid the remote back into his jacket, as if he had done nothing more significant than silence a phone. Every exit on every floor. Stairwells. Loading docks. The employee garage. Nobody leaves Kong Dynamics until I decide they can. The color left her face, and she was glad of the 10 feet of marble between them, because it gave her a reason not to let him see her hands tremble. "You locked me in your own building." I locked everyone in my own building, he said. You are simply the reason I did it. Naomi turned toward the office door out of pure instinct, the animal part of her brain insisting that motion equaled safety even when logic told her otherwise. The door was still unlocked. This was his office, his sanctuary, the one room in the tower he trusted enough to leave open. It was every door beyond it that had just become a wall. You can't keep me here. I can keep this entire building here for exactly as long as I need to, he said, and for the first time something almost like weariness moved through his voice, quickly smoothed away. There are things in that safe you don't understand, Naomi. Context you never asked me for. I didn't need to ask. Photographs of 3 dead men speak pretty clearly on their own. 2 of them betrayed people I loved. His jaw tightened, just barely. The only crack in 8 months of careful composure she had ever managed to put there. The 3rd betrayed me. I don't expect you to understand what happens to men who do that in my world. I never wanted you to have to understand it. Then you shouldn't have married me while you were still living in it. He crossed the last of the distance between them until he stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his eyes, close enough that she could see the muscle working along his jaw, close enough that the cedar and cold air scent of him was the only thing she could smell. It should have frightened her more than it did. Some small, furious, honest part of her hated that it didn't. You want a divorce, he said quietly.
Fine.
Ask me for one when you understand exactly what you're asking to leave. Not before. And not while my enemies believe you are still the woman standing beside me. Because the moment they believe otherwise, you stop being protected by my name and start being a target because of it. Naomi's breath caught. She had expected fury. She had prepared herself for fury the entire ride up in the elevator. What she had not prepared for was this, the cold, surgical shape of a threat disguised as concern, and the sick certainty crawling up her spine that he might actually be telling her the truth. Are you saying someone wants to hurt me? I'm saying the building is locked because 10 minutes ago my head of security intercepted a message that should never have reached him. Taemin's eyes did not leave hers. Someone inside this company sold information about you. Your schedule. Your driver. The gym you go to on Tuesdays. I locked every exit because whoever they hired to use that information is very possibly already inside these walls, and I would rather have you where I can see you than free to walk directly into whatever they've planned. The office went very quiet. Outside, the hawk had gone. Only the gray sky remained, indifferent and enormous, pressing against the glass like something that wanted in. Naomi felt the floor of her certainty tilt beneath her. The divorce she had walked in here to demand suddenly smaller and more distant than the reason he had just given her for keeping her close. She hated how easily her anger reorganized itself around fear. She hated more that some traitorous instinct in her chest recognized the timbre of his voice when he said the words very possibly already inside these walls and knew, without being told, that he meant it. You could be lying to me, she said, though it came out thinner than she wanted. I could be. He did not look away. But you didn't marry a man who lies to keep people calm, Naomi. You married a man who tells the truth even when it terrifies the person hearing it. That has not changed just because you found a safe you weren't supposed to open. She wrapped her arms around herself, an old habit from childhood she thought she'd outgrown, and studied him, really studied him, for the first time since she'd walked through his door with her rehearsed speech and her steady hands. There was a tightness around his eyes she hadn't noticed on the way in, the kind of tightness that came from a man running numbers he didn't like the outcome of. His hands, always so still, flexed once at his sides and stopped. Who sold the information? She asked. I don't know yet. But you have a guess. I have several. His mouth flattened into something that wasn't quite a smile. None of them are people I want to be wrong about, and all of them are people who have worked for me for years. Naomi thought of the assistant who brought her coffee every morning with 2 sugars, exactly the way she liked it. She thought of the driver who had memorized her Tuesday gym schedule without ever being told twice. She thought of how easy it would be for someone that close, that trusted, to become the crack a stranger slipped through, and something cold settled low in her stomach that had nothing to do with Taemin at all. So, what happens now? She said. I just stay locked in a building with you until you figure out who wants to hurt me? You stay locked in a building with me, he said, because right now this tower is the only place in Seoul I can guarantee no one gets to you without going through me first. That's not an answer to my question about the divorce. No, he agreed. It isn't. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Down the hall, faint and mechanical, another lock clicked shut, sealing something on a lower floor, and the sound moved through the building like a held breath finally released. Naomi realized she had stopped being angry about the exit sometime in the last 2 minutes, and had started, despite every instinct telling her not to, being afraid of something else entirely, the man standing in front of her, and how much of what he said she still, infuriatingly, believed. I'm not staying because I trust you, she said finally. I never asked you to. I'm staying because if there's actually someone in this building who wants to hurt me, I'd rather find out who before I walk into an unlocked elevator with them. She lifted her chin again, reclaiming what ground she could. That's the only reason. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name, gone as quickly as it came. Understood. He turned and crossed back toward his desk, and Naomi watched the line of his shoulders, the controlled economy of every step, and thought about the 3 photographs in the safe, the 3 names attached to them, and the 8 months of marriage she had spent believing the version of him that never quite matched the silence in his office at midnight. She thought about the note in his voice when he'd said context you never asked me for, and wondered, with a dread that tasted like grief, whether she actually wanted that context or whether not knowing had simply been easier. Tell me about the 3rd name, she said. The one you said betrayed you directly. Taemin's hand stilled over the tablet on his desk. He did not turn around right away, and when he finally did, something in his expression had changed, not softened, exactly, but opened a fraction of an inch, like a door left unlocked out of habit rather than intention. His name was Han Di-yeon, he said. He ran logistics for me for 6 years. I trusted him with more than I trusted my own blood. A pause, precise and deliberate, the kind he used when choosing which truth to hand someone and which to keep. He was also the man who introduced me to my first wife. The one who died because of a decision he made behind my back. The office seemed to grow smaller. Naomi had known, distantly, that there had been a first wife, a name mentioned once at a dinner she was not meant to overhear, a photograph she had found turned face down in a drawer and never asked about. She had not known there was a betrayal attached to it, a specific man, a specific debt still being paid in the dark. You never told me that, she said quietly. There are things about this life I hoped you would never need to carry. Taemin's voice had lost its edge, replaced by something heavier, older. I was wrong to think I could protect you from all of it by simply not saying the words out loud. Naomi felt the shape of the last 8 months rearranging itself around this new piece of him, and she hated how much she wanted to ask more, how much some part of her, the part that had said yes at that altar, the part that had meant it, still wanted to understand the man instead of simply escaping him. I still want the divorce, she said, because it was true, and because saying it kept her standing on solid ground. But I want to know who's coming for me first. After that, we finished this conversation. Taemin studied her for a long moment, and something like respect moved behind the ice in his eyes, quiet and unwilling. After that, he agreed, we finished this conversation. Neither of them moved toward the door.
Neither of them needed to.
It was locked, and for the first time since she'd walked into his office, Naomi understood that some part of her was relieved by that fact, and hated herself a little for it. The quiet did not last. A soft chime sounded from the panel beside the office door, followed by 3 sharp knocks that carried more urgency than courtesy. Taemin crossed the room and opened it himself, which told Naomi everything about how seriously he took whoever stood on the other side. It was Minho, his head of security, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s whose calm had always struck her as the professional kind, the kind trained into a person rather than born in them. That calm was fraying now at the edges. We found him, Minho said, his eyes flicking once to Naomi before settling back on his boss. Security footage from the east stairwell, 11 minutes ago. It's June. Naomi's stomach dropped. June was the assistant. The one with the coffee, 2 sugars, every morning without fail. Taemin's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room did, dropping several degrees in the space of a breath. Where is he now? Sublevel 2. He hasn't tried the exits. He knows they're locked. He's just standing there.
Minho hesitated.
He's not alone. Who is with him? We don't know. Male, tall, face covered. He came in through the loading dock 40 minutes before you sealed the building. If you'd waited another 10 minutes to lock it down. I didn't wait, Taemin said, flat and final, and something in the words carried the specific weight of a man who understood exactly how close a margin he had been working with. He turned to Naomi. Sublevel 2 is where the private elevator terminates. It is also, as of this morning, apparently no longer private. Naomi's pulse climbed into her throat. You think he brought that man here for me? I think, Taemin said, that you were correct to be afraid of walking into an unlocked elevator. He looked at Minho. Full lockdown holds. I want eyes on sublevel 2, but nobody moves until I get there. Sir, with respect, you should not be the one going down. I am aware of what respect sounds like, Minho, and this is not it. Taemin's voice carried no heat, only certainty, the kind that ended arguments before they started. Get 3 men to the stairwell exits above sublevel 2. No one else enters or leaves that floor. Minho did not argue again. He left at a pace just short of running, and the door clicked shut behind him with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. Naomi stood very still in the middle of the office, the marble cold even through the soles of her shoes, and watched Taemin cross to a cabinet behind his desk that she had never once seen him open. Inside it, arranged with the same unnerving precision he brought to everything, was a handgun in a leather holster and a spare magazine beside it. He checked the weapon with hands that did not shake, movements economical and practiced, a man handling a familiar tool rather than a weapon of violence. Stay in this office, he said, not looking at her.
No.
He looked up at that, something sharp crossing his face. Naomi, you just told me someone downstairs might be here for me. You are not leaving me alone in a room with a door that locks from the outside while you go find out. Her voice did not waver, though her hands, pressed flat against her sides, were shaking now. Finally, the fear catching up to her all at once. If he's after me, then I need to know what he looks like. I need to be able to recognize him if he gets past you. Taemin's jaw worked once, the muscle flexing beneath skin, and for a moment she thought he would simply pick her up and lock the door himself. Instead he exhaled, slow and controlled, and something in his shoulders yielded a fraction of an inch. You stay behind me, he said. The entire time. No exceptions.
Fine.
I mean it, Naomi. Whatever you think of me right now, whatever is still true after today, you stay behind me. I said fine, Taemin. He held her eyes another beat, as though searching for the lie in her answer, and not finding one, and then he moved past her toward the door, the holstered weapon settled against his ribs beneath his jacket, invisible again, the way violence always was on him until the exact moment it wasn't. The private elevator ran on a separate line from the rest of the building, and it opened for Taemin the instant he pressed his palm against the panel beside it, ignoring the general lockdown he himself had ordered. Naomi stepped in beside him, close enough to feel the tension radiating off him like heat off asphalt, and the door slid shut with a hush that felt obscene given what waited 14 floors below. Tell me something, she said, watching the numbers fall. If this is June, if he's the one who sold me out, what happens to him? Taemin did not look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the doors, reading something in the seams of them that she couldn't see. That depends entirely on what he did it for. And if it's money, then it is still a betrayal, but a survivable one.
A pause.
If it is something else, if someone reached him through fear or through someone he loves, then I need to know that too before I decide anything. You almost sound like you'd forgive him. I don't forgive, Taemin said quietly. I understand. Those are different things, and the difference matters more than people outside my world ever believe it does. The elevator slowed. Naomi's heart climbed with the loss of momentum, every nerve in her body drawing tight, and she found herself reaching out before she decided to do it, her fingers closing around the sleeve of his jacket. He glanced down at her hand, and something unreadable passed behind his eyes, quickly buried. Behind me, he said again, softer this time. The whole time. The doors opened onto sublevel 2, and the cold hit her first. Not the temperature of the air, but something colder, a stillness that had no business existing in a building this alive. Concrete stretched in either direction under sterile white light, and 30 feet away, beside the sealed emergency exit, stood June. He looked smaller than she remembered him. His hands were empty at his sides, and his face, when he turned toward the sound of the elevator, was the face of a man who had already understood there was no version of tonight that ended well for him. Beside him, half a step back and half in shadow, stood the second man Minho had described, tall, still, his face obscured beneath a dark hood, utterly motionless in a way that struck Naomi as far more unsettling than if he had moved. "Kong Taemin," June said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable of the name he had said easily 1,000 times over the years, bringing coffee, holding doors, existing in the background of a life he had apparently decided to sell. "You brought someone into my building to hurt my wife," Taemin said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words landed in the concrete stillness like stones dropped down a well. "I want to hear you say why, and I want to hear it before he decides to make this harder than it needs to be." June's throat worked. His eyes flicked once to Naomi, guilt and terror tangled together on his face, and then back to Taemin. "They have my sister," he said, the words tumbling out too fast, too raw to be anything but true. "3 days ago. They said if I didn't get them away into the building, into your schedule, they'd—" His voice broke entirely. "I didn't know it would be her. I swear to you, I didn't know they wanted your wife. I thought it was information. Just information." Something in Taemin's stance shifted, fractional, unreadable to anyone who hadn't spent 8 months learning the grammar of his stillness. Naomi, standing close enough behind him to feel it, understood immediately that this had just become something more complicated than betrayal for money. The hooded man moved. It happened fast, the kind of fast that erased the half-second of hesitation everyone else in the room was still occupying, and Naomi's breath caught as he closed the distance toward them with a blade already low in his hand, angled up, aimed not at Taemin but past him, toward her.
She did not think.
She had promised to stay behind him, and some old, furious instinct in her overrode that promise entirely. She shoved sideways into the nearest support column, dragging herself out of the direct line even as Taemin pivoted, impossibly smooth, meeting the attacker's arm with his own, and turning the blade's trajectory into empty air instead of flesh. What followed lasted seconds. It felt longer. Taemin moved the way water moved around a rock. No wasted motion, no hesitation, his hand finding the attacker's wrist and twisting until the blade clattered against concrete, his other hand driving up and in with a precision that spoke of a violence rehearsed so many times it had become as natural to him as breathing. The hooded man went down hard and stayed down, and the sound of it echoed once against the concrete and then died. Naomi's ears were ringing. She realized, distantly, that she had pressed both hands flat against the cold column at her back, and that Taemin was already turning toward her, closing the distance in 2 strides, his eyes moving over her face and body with a fear he had not once shown the man on the ground. "Are you hurt?"
"I'm fine."
Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I'm fine, Taemin." He exhaled, and for one unguarded second the ice in his eyes gave way to something raw and human, something that looked, absurdly, like relief so total it bordered on grief. Then it was gone, folded away, and he turned back toward June, who had not moved, who stood frozen against the wall with tears cutting silent tracks down his face. "Your sister," Taemin said. "Where is she being held?" "I don't know exactly. A warehouse. Near the port, I think. They blindfolded me when they—" "Minho," Taemin said, without raising his voice, and Naomi realized only then that the security chief had come down the stairwell behind them at some point during the last 10 seconds, weapon drawn, already assessing the man on the ground. "Get everything you can out of him about the port location."
Gently.
"He is not our enemy tonight." Minho nodded once and moved to June's side, and Naomi watched Taemin crouch beside the hooded man, checking for a pulse with 2 fingers against his throat, his expression unreadable, cataloging rather than mourning. "Alive," he said, mostly to himself.
Good.
Alive men answer questions. Naomi found her legs again and crossed to where he crouched. You saved my life just now. You disobeyed me and moved on your own the exact moment it mattered, he said, rising, and there was no reprimand in it, only something that sounded almost like awe. You put distance between yourself and the blade before I even registered the angle. That is not something I taught you. That is something you already had. I've spent 8 months married to a man who keeps a gun in his desk drawer, she said. I learned to pay attention. Something shifted in his face, quiet and unguarded, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there in the cold white light of the sublevel, the aftermath of violence settling around them like dust after a fall. There's a woman out there who needs help because of tonight, Naomi said. June's sister. We need to go get her. We, Taemin repeated. I'm not asking your permission for that either. She held his gaze, steady despite the tremor still working through her hands. I've been in your world for 8 months, and I finally understand it well enough to be useful in it. Let me be useful. He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes, pride and fear and a reluctance she suspected had less to do with her capability and more to do with how much he had already almost lost tonight. You stay in the second car, he said finally. Behind the line. I mean it this time, Naomi, and not because I doubt you. Because I cannot do what needs to be done at that warehouse and watch for you at the same time, and I need to be able to do both without choosing. It was, she realized, the most honest thing he had said to her since she walked into his office that morning demanding a divorce. Not a command born of control, but a fear born of love he had never once said out loud. Okay, she said quietly. Second car. Behind the line. The warehouse sat at the edge of the port district, corrugated steel gone rust-colored under sodium lights, the smell of salt and diesel thick enough to taste. Naomi watched from the back seat of the second car as Taemin's men moved through the dark in practiced silence, and she thought, not for the first time that night, about how easily her life had folded itself around a rhythm of violence she had once believed she could simply choose not to know. It took 11 minutes. She counted every one of them with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, willing her heart to slow, and when Taemin finally emerged from the warehouse's side door with a young woman wrapped in his own jacket, uninjured, shaking but alive, something in Naomi's chest cracked open with a relief so complete it left her breathless. She was out of the car before Minho could stop her, crossing the wet asphalt to where Taemin stood, and she did not think about the divorce papers waiting in her lawyer's office, or the photographs in the safe, or the 8 months of careful distance she had built around her own heart to survive loving a man like this. She only thought about the fact that he was standing in front of her unharmed, having just walked into danger without a second's hesitation to save a woman he had never met, because the alternative was letting another person's sister disappear the way his first wife once had. You went in without waiting for backup, she said. She didn't have 11 more minutes to spare, he said simply, and handed the young woman off to Minho, who guided her gently toward a waiting car and a blanket and, eventually, her brother. Naomi looked up at Taemin in the sodium light, salt air moving between them, and found she had run out of ways to hold the distance she'd walked in with that morning. I still want to know everything, she said. About the safe. About your first wife. About every name in that drawer, and every debt you're still paying in the dark. I'm not asking you to protect me from your world anymore, Taemin. I'm asking you to let me stand in it beside you. His hand came up, slow and deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the violence she had watched him deliver 20 minutes earlier, and that contradiction, she understood now, was the truest thing about him. I locked every exit in that building today because I could not bear the thought of you walking out of my life before I found a way to deserve you staying in it, he said quietly. That was never about control, Naomi. It was the only language I had left for a fear I did not know how to say out loud. Then say it now, she said. Plainly. No metal remotes.
No locked doors.
I love you, Kong Taemin said, the words simple and unguarded in a way nothing else about him ever was. I have loved you since before I understood how dangerous it would be to let you see all of me. Tonight you saw it anyway and you stayed. Naomi reached up and pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her hand, steady now where it had not been steady all night, and she understood, standing there in the cold, salt air with a stranger's sister safely wrapped in a stolen jacket nearby, that she was no longer the woman who had walked into his office that morning to end something. "I'm not signing those papers," she said. "I know," he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, Kong Taemin smiled like a man who had finally stopped waiting to lose something. Later that night, back in the tower that had trapped her that morning, Naomi stood at the window of the top floor and watched the city glitter beneath a sky finally clearing of clouds. The building was unlocked now. Every exit released the moment the threat had been confirmed contained, and yet she found she had no urge to test any of the doors. Taemin came to stand beside her, close but not touching, giving her the space he had learned, somewhere in the last 12 hours, that she needed before she reached for him herself. "Tell me one more thing," she said, without turning. "When Jun's sister is safe, what happens to him?" "He keeps his job," Taemin said. "He pays back what fear cost him, in time, in loyalty proven twice over. But he does not lose what's left of his family for a mistake made under a knife at someone else's throat. I told you. I understand. I do not forgive easily, but I recognize a man who is cornered rather than a man who chose greed." Naomi turned to look at him then, and something in her chest settled into a shape she recognized as peace, rare and unfamiliar as it was. "That's the version of you I wanted to know existed," she said. "The one that was always underneath the suits and the locked doors." "He is not new," Taemin said quietly. "He was only waiting for someone willing to stay long enough to see him." She reached for his hand, and this time neither of them let go, and outside the glass the city kept breathing, unaware of how close it had come to losing something neither of them had been ready to name until tonight, and how, in the end, it had been a woman who refused to run who had held the whole fragile architecture of it together.